how Siebert had asked for some old meetings,
Oh.
and they were on VHS. We had to go do the VHS to DVD thing.
Uh-huh, conversion.
Yeah.
Just set up a little side business doing that.
You're not that old. You're not that young.
How about Beta?
I did have a
Beta was better.
I did have a neighbor with a Laserdisc player.
Oh.
That was fun.
Yeah, down the street.
Uh-huh.
My buddy's dad had one. All right, ready?
Yeah.
All right. Good evening, board members and residents. I'd like to call to order our regular board meeting for Monday, June 9th, 2014. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Yes, Mr. Batanti.
Yes.
Mr. Brado.
Yes.
Mr. Capro.
Yes.
Mr. Tominello.
Yes.
Mr. York.
Here.
Mr. Witt. Here. Mr. Verkest.
Here. All right, thank
Confused
you.
there for a while.
Yes,
Derailed me.
yes. All right, next on our agenda is the approval of the consent agenda, including approval of the regular board meeting minutes of May 27, 2014, and the special board meeting minutes of May 20th, 2014, and approval of the bills in the amount of $957,003.25. Is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
All right, is there support?
Support.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. York with support by Mr. Capral. Is there any discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Board. Next is the approval of our regular agenda. Board members, I didn't hear any revisions to the agenda. Are there? And if not, is there a motion to approve the regular agenda as presented?
So moved. Support.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. York with support by Mr. Tominello to approve the agenda. Discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Board. Next on our agenda is announcements. I have a few announcements. The Harrison Township Public Library is hosting multiple events. Children's Summer Reading Book Club will begin Saturday, June 14th, and end Saturday, August 9th. Come join our kickoff celebration this Saturday from 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. There will be refreshments, prizes, and a free book given to each child. A summer reading book club finale will be held on Saturday, August 9th for all of the summer reading book club participants. Story Hour will also be held Saturday, June 14th from 11 a.m. to noon. This month's theme is butterflies with the reading of The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. Tales with Tales will be held Wednesday, June 18th, starting at 1 p.m. Children will have the opportunity to read with a therapy dog. To register for library events, please call 586-329-1261 or stop in the library and sign up. Please remember, for all library events, children must be accompanied by an adult. The Harrison Township Beautification Commission presents Inspirations Garden Tour on Saturday, July 26th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Please contact 586-242-3868 for more information. Thanks to the volunteers, the Parks and Recreation Committee, the families and contestants who participated in the 10th Annual Fishing Derby this past Saturday. Maybe turn to Mr. Capral, but for any of information on any of these events, you can call the supervisor's office, 466-1445, or visit the township's website, harrison-township.org. Mr. Capral, do you have anything to add on the fishing derby?
I do, and turned out to be one of our best days for fishing. The sun was shining for a change. We ended up with 68 participants, and turned out to be a real nice time. We have a couple of the winners. I'll just give their names and what they caught real quick. Jasmine Berlin won in the 4 to 7-year-old age group with a 13-inch bass. Jonathan Vespa won in the 8 to 12-year-old age group with a 26-inch catfish. And then in the preteen, 13 to 16-year-olds, Ryan Klein caught a 22-inch pike. And I'd just like to thank all the people that were out there to help, specifically Adam Witt, Mark Sinkowski, Kim Broski, Dick Going, who is our fishing specialist, Hunter Broski, Zach Capral, community service hours for those young folks, and then my wife, Nancy Capral, and I also like to thank Andrew for all the effort that he put in, and special appreciation to Lake St. Clair Metro Park for letting us host the fishing derby there.
Well, it's a great event, and certainly a special thanks to you, Mr. Capral, and your committee for all the work you put into that event and so many others.
Thank you.
Also, in 2.5 weeks, on Friday, June 27th at 9 a.m., I'll be hosting the State of the Township Address at Wilson Marine. Anyone interested in attending that? That's an event put on by the Macomb Chamber of Commerce, so contact them for information. We'll also get some information on that on the website. Any other announcements? All right. Next on our agenda is item B, our 2013 audit report by Stewart, Bouvet, and Whipple. Mr. Witt?
I believe Paul Bailey from the firm is here, and I think they have a brief presentation they're gonna run down for us. So.
Well, that's not any of those three names.
What's that? No, it isn't. What Jason's handing out here is a copy of the slides, just so you can make notes on. Again, my name's Paul Bailey. I'm the partner in charge of your engagement. This is Jason Zernts. He's the senior on your job. He spends pretty much every day down here conducting the audit with the rest of our staff. As you know, you contract with our firm. We spend about 2 weeks here performing the audit, usually in March, pull it all together, meet with the supervisor, clerk, and treasurer, and go over it in a lot of detail, and then present it here tonight. Before we start talking about the numbers, I guess just kind of go over a brief overview of the audit. Everything went very well and went as planned. Your staff is very cooperative with us, provides us any of the data that we request, and we do appreciate that. It makes it go a lot smoother. If we turn to the next slide, the second slide there, how to turn it.
Is it in there?
Well, it just needs to hit
This technology works.
it. Right key.
Okay, one of the first things in the audit report is something called the Independent Auditor's Report. Technically, it's the second page in the handout. Technically, the only portion of the report that belongs to,
Does that have batteries?
what's that?
Yeah.
Okay. The bottom one. Again, the Independent Auditor's Report, it's where our firm gives an opinion on whether your financial statements are presented in accordance with general accepted accounting principles and governmental auditing standards. You have what they call an unmodified or clean opinion, and that's what you're looking for. That's what the state of Michigan's looking for when they get your audit report, is this opinion. If we turn to the next slide, maybe. What's that?
I would think it would, there you go, there it goes.
That way.
Oh, thank
Point
you.
it that way.
No, it doesn't matter.
Oh, is it?
We'll talk about your general fund. Your general fund, you can see, had assets of $3,783. You can see the liabilities / deferred revenues of $287, which left a fund balance as of December 31st, 2013 of $2,720,735, and we'll talk more about that as we go. We turn to the next slide. The statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in fund balance for your general fund or the operating statement. You'll see your general fund took in $2,643,786. You spent $2,747,955. You transferred to other funds $156,635. So for the year ended December 31st, 2013, your general fund had expenditures over revenues of $260,804. Most of those transfers to other funds went to the building inspection fund. 137,000 went to the building inspection fund, and approximately 17,000 went to your police fund. And you see how they compare to your 2012 numbers right next to it. The next slide there, we try to give you a pie graph of your general fund revenues. You'll see this year, approximately 72% of your revenues came from what they call intergovernmental, basically state shared revenue. You'll see that's down or up pretty significantly from the year before. It was 64%. The main reason for that is in 2013, you moved most of your taxes out of the general fund. So now the state shared revenues become a larger piece of your general fund. Again, I always caution people when they're looking at pie graphs, be careful, because when you remove one piece, doesn't mean that the amount of revenues you received were more. It just changes the proportion of each of the pies in there. And like I say, your tax revenue from 2012 to 2011 as a percentage went from 11% to 3%. Taxes in 2012, tax revenues in 2012 was $326,844. And in 2013, your general fund only kept $68,867. So that's why the intergovernmental or the state shared revenues become a lot bigger piece of your general fund revenue source. The next pie graph just breaks down your general fund expenditures by function. You'll see this year you spent about 78% on what they call general government. We'll break that down in a few minutes. The biggest change from year to year was the transfers. Last year you transferred quite a bit of money to your building and site fund for the bike path. And you'll see that transfers out went from 15% in 2012 to 6% in 2013, and that's your biggest change. And again, that affects each piece of the pie as you look at it. The next pie graph there takes the general government and breaks it down. As we've talked in the past, general government includes a number of different things. It includes the supervisor, the clerk, the treasurer, the township board. You can see each one of them here in a percentage of the general government. And they stayed pretty consistent. About 20% of it is what they call administration. You can see grounds and hall and equipment's about 10% this year. Treasurer's office was 14%. Just gives you a picture of where you spent your general fund, general government dollars, because it's such a large chunk of your general fund. And when you're comparing it to another municipality, a lot of times your police and fire fund have separate funds. A lot of times, if somebody may say, well, we only spend, 37% or 40% of our money on general government, but their police and fire department is part of their general fund. So you got to be careful when you're comparing one municipality to another that you're comparing apples and apples. You have a separate fund because you have a dedicated tax levy for both the police and fire. So they're separated. They're not included in these numbers here. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. The next slide there just basically gives you a picture of your fund balance. Again, your total fund balance over to the far right-hand column is $2,720,735. There's basically three classifications. There's what they call the non-spendable. That's a deposit that you have out there for $4,000. The committed and assigned is money that you've set aside for a particular purpose. In this case, for a capital improvement and debt retirement for $171,000 approximately. And then you've also estimated you're going to use about $179,000 in your 2014 budget. So you've set that's shown as committed fund balance because you've already planned on using it in that way. And that finally leaves the unassigned, and that's just what it is. You haven't committed it for any particular purpose or anything for the $2,366,516. The next slide there just gives you a bar graph of your fund balance. You can see it stayed pretty consistent from 2009 to 2011, and then for the last couple of years has taken a slight dip. With the economy, though, you're doing a good job. You still have a healthy fund balance in your general fund, but again, you have went down the last 2 years. The next slide there, I guess I went too far. I'll just kind of skip. I don't know how to go back. Oh, maybe I do. trying to get to the slide I want to get to. Okay, this is your, as you know, there's a number of other funds that are used to account for township operations. We're not going to go read through all the numbers. You can see your fire fund is on that next slide. Had revenues of 4.6 million, had expenditures of 5.3 million. So you actually used up 717,000 of your fund balance. That leaves about 600,000. We'll see that in a few minutes. For the last couple, 3 years, your fire fund has been going, you've been spending quite a bit more than you've been taking in for your fire fund, and I know you're aware of that. Your police fund, you'll see in the far right-hand column is actually a negative expenses over revenues of 1,242, but that was after a transfer from, you actually had to transfer 17,000 from your general fund to keep that out of a deficit. Your grant fund, money comes in and goes out. You actually spent 28,582 more than you took in that fund. Parks and Rec, you were $33,790 to the good. The building inspection fund, you'll see is the next line. The far left shows no revenues over expenditures, but you transferred in that 137,748 from the general fund there to keep it out of a deficit, to cover the expenses. And then finally, the library fund was to the good, $1,231. Okay. You also have what they call debt service fund and capital projects funds, and you can just see the revenues and expenditures on this page. The only thing I guess I'll note here is the special assessment capital projects fund was closed out during the year to the debt fund. These monies are set aside for particular purposes, primarily to do debt service or a capital project type fund. The fund balance in each of your funds, as I indicated, your fire fund has a fund balance of $646,826 as of December 31st, 2013. Your police had $408. Your grant fund had $27,978. Parks and Rec, $16,102. The library had $112,031. The debt service fund there was $622,301. Your building and site fund had $64,971, and your special assessment revolving $35,828. A couple of the other funds included in your audit report there is what they call proprietary funds or your enterprise funds, and these funds operate similar to a business. And there's basically, you have your water and sewer fund, but there's three components of that. There's first of all the water and sewer operating fund. That's where most of the activity takes place. The capital maintenance fund or capital replacement fund is where you transfer money over to accumulate for future capital requirements. And then finally, the Macomb and Oakland interface. As you're well aware, you owe a lot of debt for that interface, as well as you own a portion of a lot of assets there. We'll talk primarily about the first column. You'll see your operating revenues was $6.5 million. Your operating expenses without depreciation was $6,077,000. So your operating income before depreciation was $459,150, and we kind of bolded that number for you. You then can see at the bottom, this year you transferred $897,000 over to your capital replacement fund. But again, your water and sewer fund was basically $460,000 to the good without depreciation funding. So you funded about 50% of the depreciation in your water and sewer fund. The next slide there just gives you what they call working capital. And it's kind of if you took all your assets that are cash or readily convertible to cash and you paid off all your liabilities, how much money would you have left over? And about in the middle of the page it says working capital at 12/31/13. Your water and sewer fund would have $3,640,000. Your capital replacement would have $1,546,000 and the Macomb interface fund would have about $23,841, just to give you some idea. Also, there's a number of pension funds. You have the Fireman's Pension Trust Fund, the Employees Retirement System, and then the Retirees Healthcare Fund. You can see the contributions and the investment income of each one of them. as well as the expenditures. Your fireman's trust fund was to the good this year, $469,455. Your employees' retirement system was to the good, $1,881,600. And your retiree healthcare fund was to the positive, $509,330. Pretty good year with the market value on your assets.
Thank the mid-caps.
What's that?
I said, thank the mid-caps.
Yes. One more chart there. One of the things we do is we take all your expenses, because as you have seen that there's a lot of different vehicles used to record activities of the township. And we try to put them all together and say, okay, if you took a look at the township expenditures and put everything together, where would you spend your money? This year, you spent about 40% of it on what they call public safety, primarily police and fire, also would be the building inspection fund, but about 40 cents of the entire township revenues or expenditures were spent on public safety. The next largest there is the water and sewer fund. You spent about 36 cents of every dollar that came in on your water and sewer operations, and you can see each one of their. Debt service was about 2%, refuge was 7%. Just try to give you an idea when you put it all together into one pot of where you spend your dollars. Also, in the back of your, I think each one of you got an electronic copy, but in the back of the hard copy that we handed out tonight, there's 2 reports. The first one is probably the most crucial. It's called the Report on Internal Control. It's just kind of stuck in the back of the audit, the binder. They're just kind of pushed in the back. It'll say, it has a long heading, big heading on the top of it. Should be the very last thing in your report that we just pushed in there. The letter called the Report on Internal Control. In order for a CPA firm to do an audit, we spend a considerable amount of time looking at your controls to see if you have checks and balances. When checks are written, who has to approve the invoice? How does the checks get signed? When money comes in, how does it get recorded? And if we become aware of any weaknesses, we got to communicate it to the board. Again, this year, we're happy to report there were no what we call material weaknesses to your system. Your checks go through a number of processes. 3 different sets of elected officials look at each one of them, sign the check, as well as most of your other processes have a pretty good checks and balances. The final letter that you have there is the audit communication letter. It kind of just goes through a few things that we talked about tonight. CPA firms are not required to come to a meeting like this. We do appreciate the opportunity to present this and answer any questions to you, but it just tells you whether we had any difficulties or anything, and we did not have any difficulties in performing the audit. The audit went as planned, and again, as I indicated, your staff is very cooperative. We don't suggest, when we come in, we get a set of your internal records, and we go through and we do a lot of audits. Now, we may suggest minor little changes, but we didn't suggest any what we call material entries or significant entries, which is very important because when you're making decisions, you can rely on your internal records to be accurate, at least historically, that's been the way it has been the last few years. So, again, we did not make any significant entries or suggest any significant entries to your internal records there. Are any questions that I didn't answer? I know I went through it very quickly. It's probably a 60-some page document, but I know you got a lot of other things on your agenda.
Do you have a question?
I do. Mr. Bailey, you had made a comment when you were talking about the funds and the general fund, and you had said something along the lines of that the general fund had a healthy balance or was in good condition. Could you elaborate on that and maybe put that in context for me as compared to what causes you to make that statement? I'm glad to hear it. I'd just like to know.
Well, as a true dollar value, as a percent of your general fund expenditure, it is a pretty good sized fund balance. But we're working internally looking at something for, and I've just spent quite a bit of time comparing your fund balance to a few other municipalities. And the problem with comparing fund balance in your general fund to municipality A or B out there is a lot of municipalities will put money into what they call capital improvement funds. They will put money into revolving improvement funds. So I don't want to say hide money, but they'll push it aside to a lot of different places. So if you look at your fund balance as a percentage of your expenditures, it's relatively high compared to a lot of municipalities. But you don't have a capital improvement fund, and your police and fire expenditures are separate from your general fund, and those add to more than $8 million. So if you put those back into your general fund, your fund balance, if I recall from the schedule I was working on today, would be more like 30% of your annual expenditures. And that's pretty well in line with a lot of the municipalities we were looking at as a comparison, and we were actually doing that for another purpose with the township. But overall, you still have a healthy fund balance there. I don't know if I answered your question.
I think you did, and that's, I just wanted some context for,
Yeah.
making that statement, because
Yeah.
it's important. Thank you.
It's really, like I say, because people will pull different type of expenditures out of the general fund, you've got to a lot of times take a closer look and say, okay, if you just compare the general fund, you could say, well, Harrison may be a little bit higher than another municipality, but they may have $2 million or $1 million set over what they call a capital improvement fund or improvement revolving fund. There's a lot of different names that people use to put money aside for particular projects that they want to do in the future. And so you really, when you're looking at them, you got to bring them back together.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, in light of that, first, I'd like to thank both of you and your staff for the work that you did. Point out to the board and to residents that certainly a big part of the audit is to make sure that our books and records and that are in order. But you'd mentioned, checks and balances and controls. And it's important for residents and for all the board members to understand that some of our checks and balances or some of our controls have been brought forward. Some of our improvements on a gradual basis have come from your firm, suggestions. So we really also benefit not only from your audit, but from some of the ideas, an outside look at things, and we're appreciative of that.
Well, it works well here, in all honesty, since you brought it up. It's, the treasurer's office and the finance department work pretty closely here. There's no, in some other communities, the finance department, doesn't work very well with the treasurer, and we seem to work really well together, and if we find a hole in the system, we try to patch it, which we've done in the past, and,
Yeah,
he does a good job on his end,
And as good as they are as auditors, and they've been fantastic to work with, it wouldn't be anything without the staff in the accounting department.
Absolutely.
Especially Mr. Spencer and the staff in the treasurer's office. So just a
Absolutely.
huge thank you to everyone out there that makes this work smoothly so we can get good financial information. So glad and thank you, and thank you to your staff too.
Absolutely. All right, any other comments or questions?
So, well, we're gonna get a discount?
hey, your tax rate's already zero, what else do you want?
Well, hearing none, be looking for a motion to receive and file the 2013 financial audit statements from Stewart Bouvet and Whipple.
So moved.
All right, we've got, was that you, Bill? I'm listening to the, okay. We've got a motion by Mr. York with support by Mr. Batanti to receive and file the 2013 annual financial statements from Stewart Bouvet and Whipple. Any discussion, board members? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, board, and thank you to both of you gentlemen.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to work with you again.
All right, next on our agenda is item C1. I'd brought this, I'd submitted this on the agenda, but Mr. Witt?
Yes, due to Mr. Swakowski's retirement, there's a vacancy on the election commission. The election commission oversees the process for the election and through their actions authorize the clerk's office to conduct the election. They approve things such as ballots, precinct workers, precinct locations, those type of things, different expenditures. So we have a pressing need to fill the position, given that we have an election coming up in August. We'll probably have a meeting within the next couple of weeks here to get that ball rolling. I know Mr. Batanti had expressed a willingness to serve in that role, and unless he changed his mind or. But
I'd be happy to do that unless somebody else on the board. would
I'm already
prefer.
on the commission, so,
yeah,
so I can't be on there twice.
Okay, so I'd be, if that's what the board's pleasure, then I'd be happy to do
so I'd offer a motion to appoint Mr. Batanti as a member of the Election Commission through November 20th, 2014.
Support.
16?
Or, yep, 16.
All
Sorry.
right. We got a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. Brado to appoint Mr. Batanti as the third member of the Election Commission through November 20th, 2016. Discussion, board members? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Next, item C2, regarding the liaison to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Board members, our recently retired trustee, Mr. Switkowski, also served as the liaison to the Zoning Board of Appeals. His retirement from the Board of Trustees has now left that position open. Board members, I will say, I did talk to Mr. Batanti about that position. He expressed a willingness to serve, but like he mentioned earlier, if there were others who had an interest, or if there was a reason anyone else had a desire to do that, he said he would open that up at this point.
I've been debating and debating and debating to throw my name in the ring. I have been sitting in the cable room for 10 years now, taping the zoning board of appeals meetings.
Uh-huh.
I think you should do it. You're always criticizing me give too many variances. You can be there and.
That
see
I
how it
do.
works.
I don't know.
Well, is there a motion?
I'm here anyways.
May I just say that I'm happy to do this, and I will work diligently at it. However, if Darren could bring more expertise quicker than I could, then that's all I would say. I'd be happy to do it.
All right. Does anybody have a motion?
Make a motion to appoint Mr. Batanti as liaison to the Zoning Board of Appeals through November 20th, 2016.
All right, we got a motion by Mr. Witt. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Mr. Capro. Discussion, board members? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, board. Next is a liaison for SEMCOG. As per the last two agenda items, Mr. Switkowski had served as a delegate to SEMCOG. I'm currently the alternate delegate. His retirement has left an opening for that. I did, when we talked about some of these openings, I did talk about that to Mr. Batanti, and he had expressed an interest. But again, if there was someone else who wanted to be a SEMCOG delegate, I think it's important for residents to understand, you know, a lot of us already have, for example, Mr. Tominello serves as the Planning Commission liaison, so that's, you know, one of the positions. I don't know that he would have been eligible or available for the ZBA liaison. So some of us do have some assignments, but this one is one that Jack had covered. So if there's an interest, let's hear it. Otherwise, we'd be looking for a motion to appoint Mr. Batanti as the delegate.
I would be interested in being an alternate
Okay.
also, in case we need an extra alternate, or if you want to step down and do something different. I mean,
Okay.
it's an option, so.
All right. I don't know if they allow for more than one
It's just-
alternate.
I don't either. I don't know.
In their bylaw, we have one delegate and
Okay.
one alternate delegate, so
But
that's,
if something changes,
Well, and I'd even be willing to step down, but I wouldn't want to put two, I
Right.
wouldn't want to be in a position where both
Two part-timers.
delegates were new to the SEMCOG. So maybe we'll go a period of time and get Mr. Batanti up to speed, and if
Sure.
he doesn't spit it out, then we'll take a look
wanna
at
be
that.
the-
Unless you'd
you wanna
like to
be
be
the
the
delegate?
delegate.
no, I mean, it's fine. I would be interested in being an alternate, but I think that,
the only difference between a delegate and an alternate, just so you might not know, not having been, it's just, it's for actually for the voting. We're only allowed one vote as a member community.
Right.
So we have a delegate and an alternate just in case the delegate's not there to vote. That's the only difference between the two
My own-
positions.
But
My
I
only
think everybody
concern-
can go. I think,
Yeah, my only concern about the, being the alternate, I mean, not being the delegate is that I think a lot of the SEMCOG meetings are probably during business hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't be able to attend a lot, and that's why I wouldn't
Well,
like
and
to
I
be the
think,
delegate. I'd rather be an
absolutely.
alternate, so.
and I think that's one of the reasons why, based on everybody's, you know,
Right.
careers or work positions, why, Mr. Swakowski assumed that role and why I thought Mr. Batanti
Right.
might be a good fit,
Yeah.
which was, you know, but again, I didn't specifically put any names in the packet because it's for sure, these positions are open to,
Right.
any board member. So having heard that, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to appoint Bill Patanti as delegate to SEMCOG through November 20th, 2016.
All right. Is there support?
Support.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Capel, with support by Mr. Brado. Is there discussion, board members? We've had some. Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you, board. Next, item C4, the Waste Hauler Hardship Committee. Board members, Mr. Swakowski served on that committee. The Waste Hauler Hardship Committee is a group of 3 citizens, 1 board member, and 2 residents. They meet once per year in the springtime, and they consider any applications from folks who've applied through the hardship process. And occasionally, there might be an exchange of emails throughout the year if an incident comes up or a special circumstance. But we're looking for someone to fill this position.
I would be interested in that one.
All right?
make a motion for Dave Brado for the hardship committee.
All right. Support. All right, we've got a motion by Mr. York with support by Mr. Batanti to appoint Mr. Brado as a member of the Waste Hauler Hardship Committee through November 20th of 2016. Discussion, board members. Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, board. Next on the agenda, item D1, regarding the building inspector. Board members, our building inspector position is currently vacant. Our current ordinance officer has expressed an interest in filling that position. He meets all qualifications. I don't believe we're in a position that we could actually even deny him that position
Well,
because it's very qualifications.
He's technically working as a
follow
building
the
official
process.
right now, correct?
Correct.
As an in an ordinance officer.
Right, yeah, he was hired as a building inspector and has that
The
position.
building inspector, I'm sorry.
Right. So the resulting shift based on his interest, once we post it, is gonna create a vacancy for a building inspector with the responsibilities of an ordinance officer. So I'm looking for a motion to post, advertise, and interview for the position of building inspector.
You know, I've been a proponent, our current person in that position has been out for several years, on and off, for several years, and
In the building inspector position.
yes, in the building inspector position, and, you know, it just seems we're off for a year, we work a year, 5 months, we're off 5 months, I don't know. But, you know, through that time, I think that the board has heard me over and over again say, you know, why don't we temporarily fill that position, why don't we temporarily fill that position? And nobody seems in a hurry to do that. But it would seem to me that after 4 years or 5 years or even 8 years, I think the person has been there 7 years, and I think that she's actually been on the job about 4. You know, at this point, why do we even need that position? And I just say that because every time I ask, why don't we temporarily fill that position, everybody says no, no, no. But then the auditors come up here and say, well, you're $140,000 to the, you know, to the red on your building department. And, you know, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if we want to do a full-time or a part-time job, but, you know, or maybe, you know, whatever the board wants to do. But it just frustrates me to no end that for years, everybody just says, no, we don't need to fill it. And then now we're going to all of a sudden, you know, we need to have a full-time person. And I just don't know that we need a full-time person at this point, like I said, so.
Well, I think it's important to note that for probably about half of the week, we employ on a part-time basis a retired building inspector from the township, so we do get assistance in that regard. And then unfortunately, because of these repeated vacancies, what we protected against by hiring a building inspector for ordinance, on the plus side, we've had that person available. So our current ordinance, our current building inspector, whose primary responsibility is ordinance, has been also filling in. What that's left is it's left a void in our ordinance enforcement because that employee is, for at least part of his time, not performing his job as an ordinance officer because he's needed to do inspection. So I would not necessarily agree with the fact that we haven't filled this position. We've filled the vacancy two ways. One way was by having someone on a part-time as-needed basis for approximately half of the week. The other part of the time has been to take an existing employee whose primary responsibility is ordinance, take them away from ordinance and put them into building inspection. So what we would be likely seeing is if we fill this position, we would be eliminating a part-time person who's made it clear that they're not going to renew their license based on the number of years that they've practiced as a building inspector. And B, we'd be able to, once again, hopefully put someone back into ordinance enforcement on a full-time basis. That's truly what this action would mean to the township.
When we hired the ordinance officer, the board made it clear that they were supposed to do ordinance.
True.
I mean, there was no doubt about that, but
Right.
I don't want to get into that argument.
Of course, the board didn't know that the employee that was doing building inspection would go out on an extended leave, number one. And number two, we hired that person with a building inspector designation and license, knowing full well that the purpose for that was a backup in the event that somebody does go out on an extended leave.
But that's my point. That's exactly my point. Maybe operate with two part-time building inspectors and the hybrid building / ordinance. That's all I'm saying. Rather than a full-time, whatever, $55,000, then an $80,000, hit on a fund that's already, running a deficit.
My only
Yeah.
concern with two part-time people is somebody's gonna look at that who is in the union and say, well, if there's work for two part-time, you probably should have a full-time. Now, I'm not saying that they have a winning argument, I'm just saying it's an argument that would be made.
No, I
We've been
understand.
able to work with our plumbing and mechanical and our electrical very successfully with some great part-time employees. But that's because the amount of work in those positions is part-time. We don't have enough to justify full-time. I think we've seen a bit of a pickup where there is a need for somebody doing just this full-time.
Has anyone ever looked at how much money the building inspector would generate in revenue?
That's a great point. Actually, one of the things that our new building official has been working on is an analysis of some of the fees, because our fees really have not been adjusted for several years. I believe that there are a lot of signs relative to construction in our community where the demand for a building inspector will be greater this year than it was in a previous year. We also have folks appearing before Planning Commission with proposals for development that again would reflect a need for, for qualified building inspectors. So if we do, and what this board said previously was that they want a full-time ordinance enforcement officer. If we don't fill this position, then we will not have an ordinance enforcement officer, because our current ordinance enforcement officer is working half-time, or say approximately 20 hours on ordinance, 20 hours on inspection. The other 20 hours of inspection is being made up by a part-time employee who's made it clear that they're not pursuing continuing education credits and they have no intention of renewing their license beyond this year.
Supervisor, I personally really feel we need a full-time ordinance officer. Being on planning, I'm sure the representatives on zoning as well, we get complaints through those two organizations within the township about ordinance violations, number one. Number two, we're trying to also rectify and resolve a lot of issues on tech team. So the more staff we have on building and zoning, the more things that we may be able to pull from planning and resolve at tech team. Trying to make it more, business friendly, trying to work with the businesses, trying to grow the businesses, so I'm all for the full-time person. I think, we have dedicated people like that come to work and do their job every day. I think that really pays off in the long run.
I'd like to have 5 people or 6 people, but, you know, when we're running a deficit in a department that's supposed to, the building department and our auditors have told us, you know, the building department should be a zero-sum game at the end of the day. And we take out ordinance out of that, we take out, but we still are putting, like you said, $137,000 into the inspection.
I think it was
means-
117, but
All right, 117. All right, and that's taking out the ordinance, that's taking out a lot of the building officials' salaries, so that's not all of those people, the planning, zoning, secretary. And that's fine, if the board wants to do that, just go in with your eyes open, so next year, when you see $200,000 deficit, that's that $80,000 for that full-time position. And that's fine if the board wants to do that, I'm just one vote.
Yeah, it's probably not 80,000, but I think we pay for a certain level of building department services. And in the last couple of years, when times have been down, it's difficult to offer the level of services that our residents expect, and we choose to deliver and turn a profit. I mean,
Or break even.
or
We're not
you
even
break
saying
even.
break
Right.
even. I
But
mean,
I mean, when times were good, the building department was able to cover expenses for a couple of years. Then the economy went south, building slowed down, and we have chosen to cover those with the general fund. So when people come in, there's somebody at the counter, there's a building inspector who's working, there's people available to them. We're not pointing them to the state and saying, hey, you gotta go talk to Lansing to get an inspection. I mean, I appreciate the idea that we need to watch where we're spending our money, but I think people expect when you run a building department, you can come in and talk to a building inspector.
But,
And I think-
but I guess my only point is that the person hasn't been there, so it doesn't matter. If people have been walking in every day talking to both clerks every day. That has never changed when that person has been gone, on a disability or whatever. Nothing's ever really changed in the building department in the dynamic.
well, again,
And,
again, though, that person was there for approximately 6 months last year, number one. Number two, upon that person's absence, we've been paying a part-time person. So that's been a cost that wouldn't be here if we hire this person. And number three, the fact is, ordinance has suffered. So really, we're not saying that what we're looking to do is save $80,000. If the board doesn't wish to do this, what you're saying is you don't wish to do ordinance enforcement, because the person who's doing this, by the end of this year, will not be getting part-time help, and we would be having this person doing full-time building inspection. We have one building inspector on the payroll right
well,
now.
I think you're looking at, it's a 95,000 hit, roughly.
Yeah, I disagree with that.
Well, you got, 50,000 salary
No. It's
for
not-
a
not-
building inspector?
I
Sure.
don't believe it's the starting salary of
Well,
50,000.
I don't go by the starting for 2 years.
So you don't go by the real numbers?
I do go by the real numbers, but the real number is your full boat after 3 years is when they, get there. That's your number. All right, what is it at their high end, which is only 3 years, and 3 years is not a large, if we had a 10-year ladder,
Sure.
maybe you could talk about a first-year salary, but when you
Gotcha.
only have a 3-year, that's
So we'll call it 50 grand.
minimal.
Okay.
Call it 50 grand. We've got a 40%, roughly, 32% kick to the pension, so that's another 20,000, 70,000, 15,000 for the healthcare plus the 1250. So 72 plus the 6%, you're about 85 or 90,000 full boat by the time you get done with your pension contribution, your health insurance, and your salary.
Can I ask, what do we eliminate when the part-timer goes away? So that, what Mr. York's talking about is the cost of this position, what goes away then? There's a takeaway then, right?
I'm not sure if I follow. So let's say this.
So we have a
Okay.
part-timer that we
Yep.
will no longer employ.
We'd
that
have a
correct?
part-time, yeah, we currently have a part-time employee paid at the rate of $25 per hour that we would no longer employ.
So that expenditure goes away?
That's correct.
That's, and what Ms. York is saying is the cost of the full-time person, whatever that number was.
Yeah, so let's call it
that's gonna be-
$80,000,
That's
right?
gonna be offset by
By
how many hours, does the part-timer work?
about 500
1,000
bucks a
hours?
week, right? So you say about $500 a week.
It's 2,000 a month.
25,000.
Yeah, yeah, 25,000.
I'm just trying to, so is it net, then, I'm just trying to get to what the net figure is.
Plus,
Right.
and plus we were paying the employee previously healthcare. That's a wash in the cost right now.
Right, the current budget has healthcare in it.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
you're right, you're right.
Right, so I'm just trying to get to the net, whatever the net of this is, so.
It-
Well, that's-
And that's why I'm saying one part of the net is a monetary cost. So what we can say is that for 2013, we had an employee who was off on a disability, so we paid for that year approximately half of that employee's salary. We continued to pay benefits to that employee. Then we paid a part-time person to backfill that person's position. But since we were already paying benefits to the person who was off and paying no benefits to the other person, our cost last year reflected of this full-time person. Our cost last year would be the same as the cost
It's a
when
it's a
this happens.
budgeted number.
It is a
Correct.
budgeted
It's a
number.
budgeted number. so-
But because of that absence
Yes.
for half of a year, the difference would be that we didn't have a person available to do ordinance enforcement for half of that time. So what we're saying is, if we choose as a board of trustees to fill this position, what'll happen is, we'll meet our budgeted numbers. In theory, or in reality, we're actually gonna save money because of the tiered benefits that are in the contract. The new person who'd likely come in under this will not receive retiree health care, so we have no OPEB obligation. And their pension obligation is substantially less. Now,
Longevity, everything, I mean, everything.
right, the contribution that's required for the pension doesn't acknowledge employee A, employee B, and employee C having different costs. The actuary lumps those costs. So if it's 32% that we have to contribute, it's 32% for everybody. But we do know that real costs for this new employee will be substantially less because their multiplier and several factors that qualify how much their pension benefit at retirement would be are substantially less. They will not get retiree health care. Several of those kinds of things. They will not receive longevity. The employee who is no longer with us was eligible for longevity. So several of those costs and benefits are gone.
I didn't even include that. Yeah.
I understand, but when you look at what we budgeted for 2013 and you do this,
This is cheaper.
we will save money doing this.
Look, I don't buy the save money argument at
Off
all.
of what's
If
budgeted.
Off
if
of what's
if-
currently
if-
budgeted, it'll be a
if-
savings.
Look,
That's true.
look, that is a bunch of, who shot John when it comes to government. And I don't buy it. I can budget $5 million and say, oh, I only spent $1 million, so I saved $4 million. That's nonsense.
What I'm saying is
Well,
this, filling this position would be cheaper than what we've budgeted.
This is the deal. You have a $137,000 deficit in the building department with having that employee off for a half a year.
And
If-
backfilling them.
And backfilling them. So let's just say for argument's sake that, it's $30,000. Roughly, I'll even go 25,000. So now you're 137, 47, 50. Now you're $162,000 in the black, or the red. That's all I'm saying.
If I have to
And
spend
don't- and don't- don't
$25,000
even
to
think-
do ordinance
don't-
enforcement, it's well
Don't even
worth it.
think that you can make an argument that you're saving money by hiring an employee. That lacks any and all common sense.
I didn't say that. What I said was, when you compare the cost of this new employee to what the previous employee was making, we will be spending less. How about if I say it that way?
That
We
would be a
will-
fair statement.
We will be spending more than what we budgeted to fill this position.
Spending less.
Yeah.
But you're
spending
still,
less. Did I
my
say
point is
spending
though,
more?
Yeah.
you're spending less, but you're still running a deficit.
There's no question about it. Ultimately, what we're saying is, ordinance enforcement, and in many cases, building inspection, does not generate enough revenue currently based on A, the amount of tickets that we write, because our primary goal with ordinance enforcement is compliance, and B, with the fact that the building industry in Harrison Township isn't booming. But there are plenty of new starts. If you drive around town, there are several areas where there's new construction going on. We're seeing more and more people reaching a point where they're able to buy some of these foreclosed homes, and almost every one of those projects result in open permits and improvements to the home and modernizations. if we want to talk strictly about revenue in the building department, I think it is reasonable to say, and I think it's conservative to say, that we can anticipate more revenue in 2014 than in 2013 because of some of these projects and some of the work that's coming up.
Yeah,
But it's for sure, I'm pretty confident that when we get to December 31 of 2014, we will have a deficit in the building department. We have not reached the point where the building department can support itself. In consideration of those factors and the likelihood that since we haven't changed our fees in somewheres of, 7, 6, 7, 8 years, something like that. We've got our building official who's taken on the task of analyzing some of those costs to try to look at what other communities are charging, with a plan to come back at the end of that project with a recommendation to the board. In light of those things, I truly believe it's responsible for us to fill this position, which is why I put it on the agenda.
Well, I am taking a much longer view than just a year or two. And the simple fact is that other than, you know, there's a couple properties around town that might get built, might not, you know, a couple of them are at planning. You're not gonna see any more big developments. We are, in all intensive purposes, we are built out right now.
We may
And-
be
and
built
I'm
out in a
just-
few
I'm-
years. I would not say we're built out now.
For all intensive purposes, there's a couple of areas, like, we all know, there's a couple big lots. You're not gonna see like the, you know, North Point, that whole subdivision where I'm at and down through there, you're not gonna see 500 homes being built in the next, you know,
We've never had a
Probably.
big development by
Well-
big development
well, I understand.
terms. I mean, that's not who we are. We don't have the 1,000-acre farm that, you know,
Right, right.
Pulte comes in
No,
and does an
yeah.
entire thing. We have fill-in. That's all we've ever had.
I think ordinance is paramount. I really do.
All right,
I
well,
think, I think we've gone long enough with just getting by on ordinance violations, and I really think until you bring this person in, we're never gonna get, our hands wrapped around it.
well, we've discussed it.
Well,
Is there
I
a
agree with-
motion
well,
at
I
some
agree with
point?
Larry, when we hired the ordinance person,
Well, but we-
I mean, I was adamant.
But it's,
But then we've gone ahead and taken
No.
that person's
Exactly.
time away from ordinance because we've got a vacancy.
And that is exactly why, when we were doing that I was arguing why we should just make it an ordinance position, period.
And if we
Because
had,
I
where
knew,
would we be
because I
today?
knew, because I
We'd be in
knew,
the same
I
position
knew,
today.
I knew that we were gonna go ahead and turn that more into a building job. And then at some point in the future, which is today, sit and say, well, we didn't get the ordinance done.
I just
we're
have a question
sorry,
for you.
it's
Did you know that
50%."
somebody was going to go off on a leave? Is that how you had this vision to the future where you knew?
No.
Well, then you didn't know that. Because the
didn't.
reason we're in the position we're in
didn't.
is because somebody went on off a leave. And we had the foresight to hire somebody that wasn't just shoeholed into one job. We could say, hey, you know what? You're not just the person that sweeps the floor. We're going to have you do something else.
That's fine.
So we were able to take somebody in-house with a limited amount of outside help to make it work. So we're still moving forward. But
Mr. Supervisor, I'm gonna go ahead and make the,
Absolutely.
make the motion to approve the post advertise and interview for the position of the building inspector.
With a recommendation to be brought back to the board for approval.
That,
Yep.
I will add that to my motion, thank
All
you.
right, there's a motion by Mr. Tominello with support by Mr. Capral. We've had a chance to beat it up pretty good. If there's no more board comments, we'll open up the floor for public comment.
Bill Serville, resident and also housing board member. I believe you do need a full-time building inspector in order to get housing running again. We're sliding down a slippery slope as far as ordinance enforcement goes. While I'm on that subject, a little off topic, but we have houses that we ordered demolition on over a year ago, and this board hasn't seen fit to allocate the money to tear those houses down. I'd like to see that happen. There's 3 of them that I know of. But at any rate, there is another thing that you can look at. Many communities share inspectors. When things got tight, and rather than lay somebody off, you need someone part-time, they have an agreement with, say, in our case, we could have an agreement with Clinton Township or Chesterfield. And there are some advantages to that. When you bring in someone that doesn't know anybody here, things tend to go a little smoother, especially in ordinance. But I have a question for you. If you hire another person, is a building inspector automatically qualified to do ordinance? Okay, so you don't need to specify be a building inspector, ordinance officer, because that's what the previous person was, and that's what's required to run housing. You need both hats. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe VJ was doing that with, when we had the full-time ordinances or the full-time building inspectors, they would, when they weren't busy, he had them out doing some ordinance
Seeing,
stuff too, I believe, yeah.
seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment, move back to board comment. The two people that we most recently had in that department under the title building inspector were both qualified to do building inspection as well as ordinance enforcement. But the thought was that the most recent person we hired, we gave them specifically the task of ordinance enforcement exclusively, but by paying, I think it was an increase of about $1,700 a year in salary, we were in a position that they could also do building inspection. Now regarding the sharing, what I understand, because I have looked into some of these reciprocal agreements, the majority of the agreements that I'm aware of have involved not necessarily a one-sided relationship, but a two-sided relationship as it pertains to inspection. So in other words, there's a reciprocating agreement where if you give me 4 hours of an inspector's time, whatever trade it might be, I agree that I owe you now 4 hours. And you know, so if Mr. Smith is on vacation for 2 weeks and your guy comes over and fills in 40 hours during that 2-week period, then I agree that when your inspector goes on vacation, I'll reciprocate it so that you don't have to have that extra person. If we have a chronic long-term need, I don't know that would give us the same solution. But if we were in a position where we had a short-term need, that's certainly an option. Any other discussion, board members? Hearing none, we have a motion by Mr. Tominello with support by Mr. Caprell to post, advertise, and interview for the position of building inspector with a recommendation to be brought back to the board for approval. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Thank you, board. Next, it's actually items listed here on our agenda as items 2 and 3. They're kind of related. Certainly, Macomb Area Communities for Regional Opportunities, otherwise known as MACRO. MACRO is an intergovernmental organization currently comprised of 9 Macomb County communities. They've addressed numerous issues such as combined dispatch services. Primarily, their focus was on dispatch, police services, and so forth. Recently, they've begun to enter the discussion relative to a regional Detroit Water and Sewer Department authority. The discussion grew out of the fact that you may have seen in the news or heard that the emergency financial manager for the city of Detroit approached Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb County about getting involved in a regional authority. But the problem with that is that Macomb County is not a wholesale customer of DWSD. We are, for example, maybe Chesterfield, maybe Shelby Township, but there are 26 or 20-some, communities in Macomb County that are each individually a customer. And Macomb County really isn't that umbrella organization, and I believe that there's a possibility that an organization like MACRO could become that umbrella organization. They've also looked at some other things, sharing resources, maybe along the same lines of what the resident discussed, sharing employees. They've also proposed an equipment sharing to where, for example, maybe our water and sewer department has a unique piece of equipment that performs a very particular function. Maybe a neighboring community has a complementing piece of equipment that they own, and we'd say, well, we'll trade you 4 hours with our piece of equipment operated by our employees in exchange for you coming over at some point in the future to be able to share. So this is an organization that I believe has a lot of opportunities for that kind of sharing. There is no cost for membership. I believe our community should be represented and involved in this organization. Attached in the board packet is a proposed resolution as well as their vision statement, bylaws, and an interlocal agreement. So I am bringing this forward. I would like to be a representative to MACRO. I have attended several of the meetings, and I'd be looking for a motion and a second representative to macro.
Well, I had mentioned to Ken that I would, in the staff meeting, that I would like to serve as the alternate, if that's available.
Yep.
Make
That's
a
fine.
motion to adopt a resolution to join the Macomb area communities for regional opportunities and to appoint as a first representative, Mr. Ken Verkest, and as a second representative, Mr. Darren York.
Support.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Tominello, with support by Mr. York. Is there a need for us to read the resolution? Mr. Witt?
I don't think so, no.
No, all right. And there would be a need for a roll call vote, though.
Correct.
Yep, all right, any discussion, board members? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, we have a motion by Mr. Tominello with support by Mr. York to adopt the resolution to join Macro and appoint Ken Verkest and Darren York as first and second representatives to Macro. Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Yes, Mr. Tominello?
Yes.
Mr. York?
Yes.
Mr. Batanti?
Yes.
Mr. Brado?
Yes.
Mr. Caprell?
Yes.
Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Verkest?
Yes. Thank you, board. All right, next on the agenda is public comment and board comment. We'll open up the floor at this time if there is any public comment.
Bill Serville, resident. What you just did, it sounds like a very excellent idea. Glad you moved forward with it.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. Does any board member have any comment? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there support?
Support.
All right, we've been moved and supported to adjourn at 8:09. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, board.
It was June 27th at 9 a.m.
June 27th? Yes, sir. Yep, 9 a.m. Wilson Marine, yes, sir.
As a matter of fact, there's like this whole,
Huh? Flyer of the head, I should. They sent me one.
and then they have to redo all.
I think he just firmed up details. I know he had talked about it, but I hadn't heard.
Well, you know what? People don't